Within the wide swath of territory that came under his control, Napoleon set about introducing many of the reforms that he had already introduced in France. Though a return to monarchy, Napoleon had no doubt destroyed democracy in France, but in administrative field he had incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. The Civil Code of 1804, usually known as Napoleonic Code, is very important. Napoleonic did away with all privileges based on birth, established equality before the law, and secured the right to property. Within the wide swathe of territory that came under his control, Napoleon set about introducing many of the reforms that he had already introduced in France. Wherever Napoleon Bonaparte conquered territories, he introduced the same reforms that were started during the French Revolution in France. These reforms aimed to modernize administration and society. Okay. Wherever Napoleon Bonaparte goes or conquered territories, he introduced the same movements and reforms that were started during the French Revolution in France. Line 2. Through a return to monarchy, Napoleon had no doubt destroyed democracy in France, but in the administrative field he had incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. Napoleon again brought monarchy, ruled by one ruler in France, so democracy weakened, people's political freedom reduced. He became emperor and concentrated power in his own hands. So before Napoleon came, the ruling was done by monarchy or king. Same thing happened, but democracy was weakened. People's political freedom also reduced. But in the administrative field, he had incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. That means even though Napoleon reduced to democracy, he still kept many good ideas of the French Revolution in administration. Okay, so even though Napoleon was ruling the country, democracy was reduced because people have low power. People have no power. Power rise in the hand of Napoleon. People's political freedom is reduced. But what happened is that he made so much changes in the administration that is good for the people. He still kept many good ideas of the French Revolution administration. He made the government more organized, logical, or rational, and efficient. Now is Napoleonic Code or Civil Code of 1804. Did away with all privileges based on birth, established equality before law, and secured the right to property. This code was exported to the regions under French control in the Dutch Republic, in Switzerland, in Italy, Germany. Napoleon simplified administrative divisions, abolished feudal system, and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. Napoleonic Code. The Civil Code of 1804, usually known as the Napoleonic Code, meaning Napoleon introduced a new law system in 1804 called Napoleonic Code. It became very famous in Europe. Did away with all privileges based on birth. Special advantages given to nobles and upper classes by birth were removed. Now people were not treated specifically because of family background. Line 6. Established equality before the law, meaning everyone became equal in front of the law. Rich and poor had the same legal rights. And secured the right to property. People got the legal right to own property safely. Their land and wealth were protected by law. This code was exported to the regions under French control. Napoleon introduced this law system in all the territories conquered by France, in the Dutch Republic, in Switzerland, in Italy, and Germany. Napoleonic reforms were spread to these Netherlands, Switzerland, Italy, and Germany. Napoleon simplified administrative divisions. He made administration easier and more organized by simplifying government divisions. Abolished the feudal system. The old feudal system was removed, a system where lords controlled land, peasants worked under them with very few rights. That system was removed and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. Peasants were freed from serfdom, that is forced service to landlords, and manorial dues, that is taxes or payments to the landlords. These two systems were removed. This improved peasants' lives greatly. In the towns, too, guild restrictions were removed. Trade organization called guilds had many strict rules. Napoleon removed these restrictions so business and trade could grow freely. Transport and communication systems were improved. Roads, transport, and communication became better. This helped trade, administration, and economic growth. Napoleon entered democracy in France but kept many revolutionary reforms. Through the Napoleonic Code, he established equality before law, removed feudal privileges, protected property rights, improved administration, and spread these reforms across Europe. Peasants, artisans, workers, and new businessmen enjoyed a new found freedom. Businessmen and small scale producers of goods, in particular, began to realize that uniform laws, standardized weights, measures, and a common national currency would facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. All common people benefited from these reforms were peasants, skilled workers or artisans, laborers, businessmen. The reforms created more opportunities and freedom for them. Enjoyed a new found freedom. People who got more freedom than before because many old restrictions were removed. This freedom was enjoyed by peasants, workers, artisans, and businessmen. Businessmen and small scale producers of goods, in particular, especially traders, shop owners, small manufacturers, benefited greatly from Napoleon's reforms. Began to realize that uniform laws. They understood that having the same laws everywhere would make business easier. Standardized weights and measures. Using the same measurement system everywhere helped trade. For example, same kilogram, same meter, same liter. This avoided confusion between regions. And a common national currency. Using one common currency throughout the country made buying and selling easier. People no longer needed to exchange different local currencies. Would facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital. These reforms made it easier to transport goods, trade products, move money or capital from one place to another. Business became faster and smoother. From one region to another, trade between different regions increased because laws were uniform, currency was common, measurements was standardized. This helped economic unity and growth. Short summary: Napoleon's reforms gave greater freedom to businessmen and producers. Uniform laws common currency, and standardized weights and measures made trade and movement of goods easier across different regions. And the Civil Code of 1804, also known as Napoleonic Code. It was introduced by Napoleon Bonaparte. So we get 3 points from this. Civil Code of 1804, also known as Napoleonic Code. It was introduced by Napoleonic Bonaparte. Main features: abolished privileges based on birth, provide equality before law, right to property, end of feudal system, removal of guilt restrictions, uniform laws were introduced, standardized weights and measures, common currency. Areas where it is spread. Effects of the Napoleonic Code: positive effects, negative effects. Okay, let's study this. The main features: abolished privileges based on birth. Special privileges of nobles and aristocrats were removed. Equality among citizens was promoted. So, abolished. First point is abolished privileges based on birth. So, what are privileges does this nobles and aristocrats were getting? That privileges were removed. That is, abolished the privileges based on birth. Second one, equality before law was introduced. All citizens become equal in the eyes of law. Same laws applied everyone. So, equality before law. That means all are equal before law. This system was introduced. Second one, right to property was introduced. People got the legal right to own property safely. Property of rights were protected. So, third one is right to property is protected. So, 3 points. First one was abolished abolished the privileges based on birth. Second one is equality, all are equal before law. Or if right to equality before law was introduced. Third one, property, right to property was secured. Third one, it is an end of feudal system. Feudalism was abolished in many regions. Peasants were freed from serfdom and manorial dues. So, feudal system came to an end. Peasants were freed from serfdom and manorial dues. What is this serfdom? Serfdom was a system in old Europe where poor farmers called serfs were forced to work on the land of rich landlords. Okay, there's rich landlords are there, so they have a land, so they find people or poor farmers to work on their land, and these poor farmers were called as serfs. Easy definition: serfdom means peasants were tied to the land and had very little freedom. Okay, that means if the landlord has a limited land or land is there, and there are poor farmers who work in this farm or land, and These peasants or farmers were not allowed to move from this land without completing their work, or uh, they were have very little freedom. So they were tied to this land. They had to work for landlords, give part of their crops, pay taxes, and obey the landlords. Okay. A rich land owns a huge farm. A poor family works there for generations. They cannot leave without permission. This system is called serfdom. What is manorial dues? Manorial dues, simple explanation. Manorial dues were the payments and services that peasants had to give to their landlord in the feudal system. Manorial dues were the payments and services that peasants had to give to their landlord in the feudal system. Manorial dues were taxes or obligations paid by peasants to the land of the manor. Who is a manor? A manor was a large estate owned by landlord or noble. So manor means it's a person, or it's a landlord or noble who owns large estates. So what is this manorial dues? Manorial dues means the dues or taxes or amount that a peasant or poor farmer has to give to these landlords or manors. So it is called as manorial dues. The landlord controlled the land, villages, and peasants living there. Okay. So this feudalism was abolished. What do you mean by this feudalism? Feudalism. Feudalism was a social and economic system in medieval Europe. Feudalism was a social and economic system in medieval Europe where society was divided into different classes based on land ownership. Okay, AC definition. Feudalism was a system in which kings give land to nobles and peasants worked on that land in return for protection. Main structure of feudalism. This system looked like this. King. The king was at the top. He owned all the land. Nobles or lords. King gave land to nobles. Nobles ruled a large estate called manors. Knights. Knights protected the land and fought wars. Peasants or serfs worked on the land, paid tax and gave free labor. Features of feudalism. So feudalism means the main person is king. King owned all the estate and lands, and he gave these lands to lords, landlords or nobles, and they gave it to peasants for farming. So king will be there, nobles on lands will be under the king, nobles and lords will be there, and under the nobles and lords, knights will be there, and under the knights, peasants and serfs will be there. This is called a feudal system. Okay. Removal of guild restrictions. The restrictions on traders and craftsmen were removed. trade and business became easier. I mean by guild. Guild. So guild means an association or a group of people doing the same craft, trade or business. So it's a group or association of people. So the king was feared that if they form groups or association of people, then they would most probably become against the king. So the guild restrictions were there. That means they cannot form guild. So these guild restrictions were removed at the time of or due to Napoleonic Code. Uniform laws. Same laws were applied throughout the territories under French control. Administration became more efficient. Same laws were applied throughout the territories under French control. Administration became more efficient. Standardized weights and measures. So, standardized weights and measures, that means common measurement systems were introduced. Uniform laws were introduced. Common currency, uniform laws, standardized weights and measures were introduced. Removal of guild restrictions, end of feudal system, right to property, equality before law, abolished privileges based on birth. 8 points. So, what was the characteristics of Napoleonic Code? First one, Napoleonic Code is also known as Civil Code of 1804. It was introduced by Napoleon Bonaparte in 1804. Now, what are the characters of this Napoleonic Code? First one is it abolished privileges based on birth. That means nobles or landlords were given some privileges based on birth that were removed. Second one is equality before law was introduced. That is, all are equal before law. There is no discrimination of poor people or rich people in the terms of law. Third one, right to property is secured. That means people got the legal right to own property safely. Property rights were protected. Third one, uniform currency was introduced. Common currency was introduced. Then uniform laws were introduced, and barriers on trades were removed. Guild restrictions were removed, and end of feudal system. And peasants were freed from manorial dues and serfdom. Standardized weights and measures were introduced. So these 8 points are important. And also areas where it is spread. The Napoleonic Code was spread to Switzerland, Germany, Italy and Netherlands. Italy, Germany and Switzerland. Effects of the Napoleonic Code. Positive effects. Promoted equality, improved administration, encouraged nationalism, helped businessmen and traders, increased economic freedom. Negative effects. Napoleon entered democracy in France. He restored monarchy and centralized power in himself. So there were both negative effects and positive effects for this Napoleonic Code. What are the positive effects of Napoleonic Code? Positive effects is first one, it introduced many properties like equality. So all are equal before law, and nationalism concept was encouraged, and it was good for traders, craftsmen, businessmen, peasants, etc. And improved administration, and also increased economic freedom. And the negative effect was democracy was reduced, and also he restored monarchy, and the centralized power was laid in himself and not in people. These two were only the negative effects of Napoleonic rule or Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code of 1804 abolished feudal privileges, established equality before law, protected property rights, and modernized administration across Europe. So coming again once to this paragraph. Within the wide swath of territory that came under his control, Napoleon set about introducing many of the reforms that he had already introduced in France. Though a return to monarchy, Napoleon had no doubt destroyed democracy in France, but in administrative field he incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. The Civil Code of 1804, usually known as Napoleonic Code, did away with all privileges based on birth, established equality before law, and secured right to property. This code was exported to the regions under French control. In the Dutch Republic, in Switzerland, in Italy, Germany, Napoleon simplified administrative divisions, abolished the feudal system, and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. In the towns too, guild restrictions were removed. Transport and communication systems were improved. Peasants, artisans, workers, and new businessmen enjoyed a new-found freedom. Businessmen and small-scale producers of goods in particular began to realize that uniform laws, standardized weights and measures, and a common national currency would facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. Okay. Mind map. Introduced by Napoleon Bonaparte, also known as Civil Code of 1804. Main features: equality before law, abolished feudal privileges based on birth, nobles lost privileges, right to property, effects economic growth, spread of nationalism, main reforms, anti-feudal system, freed peasants from serfdom, removed manorial dues, removed guild restrictions, that is helped traders and businessmen, uniform laws, that is better administration was provided, standardized weights and measures, easier trade, common currency, smooth movements of good and capital. Regions were introduced: Netherlands, Switzerland, Italy, Germany. Negative side, Napoleon destroyed democracy, returned monarchy in France. However, in the areas conquered, the reaction of the local populations to French rule were mixed. Initially, in places such as Holland and Switzerland, as well as in certain cities like Brussels, Mainz, Milan, and Warsaw, the French armies were welcomed as harbingers of liberty. But the initial enthusiasm soon turned to hostility as it became clear that the new administrative arrangements did not go in hand with political freedom. Increased taxation, censorship, forced conscription into the French armies required to conquer the rest of Europe all seemed to outweigh the advantages of the administrative changes. However, in the areas conquered, the reactions of the local population to French rule were mixed. People in the regions conquered by Napoleon Bonaparte had different opinions about French rule. Some supported the French while others opposed it. That is meaning of this mixed. That is the local populations or the reactions of the local population to French were mixed. That means the people living in France was supporters and also haters or opposers of the Napoleon Bonaparte. Some people believe that Napoleon Bonaparte is doing right, whereas other section or some people believe that he is doing not right. So they opposed his rules. That is the meaning of the sentence. However, in the areas conquered, the reactions of the local populations to French rule were mixed. Line 2. Initially, in many places such as Holland and Switzerland, as well as in certain cities like Brussels, Mainz, Milan, and Warsaw, the French armies were welcomed as harbingers of liberty. Okay, so in these places, that is Brussels, Mainz, Milan, Warsaw, and also Holland, Switzerland, there people welcomed the French armies. They supported the French because they supported the Napoleon Bonaparte. Which were the regions that supported Napoleon Bonaparte? That is Holland, Switzerland, Milan, Mainz, Warsaw, one more, Brussels. Holland, Switzerland, Brussels, Milan, Mainz, and Warsaw. The French armies were welcomed as harbingers of liberty. Here, the people of these regions welcomed the French army and they were supporters of Napoleon Bonaparte. So, they considered these French armies as harbingers of liberty. They are liberty providers, meaning people who bring freedom. Many hoped the French would end feudalism and oppressive rule. But the initial enthusiasm soon turned to hostility. After some time, people became unhappy and angry with the French rule. Support changed into opposition. It means after some time, they realized that the democracy was reduced, and so the political power of the people was reduced. So they opposed, they were changed against the French rule. As it became clear that the new administrative arrangements did not go hand in hand with the political freedom. Although Napoleon improved administration, he did not give true political freedom. People realized that they still lacked democratic rights. French control was dominating them. Although Napoleon improved administration, he did not give true political freedom. People realized they still lacked democratic rights and increased taxation. People had to pay more taxes under French rule. This created dissatisfaction. Censorship. The French government controlled newspapers, books, and ideas. Freedom of expression was restricted. Which all freedom were given? Right to equality was given, right to property was given, but freedom of expression was restricted. And what do you mean by freedom of expression? That is the freedom to express in the form of newspapers, books, ideas, etc. That was restricted. Forced conscription into the French armies. People were forced to join the French army, even though if the people doesn't like to join the army, they were forced to join the army. This is called conscription, compulsory military service, and required to conquer the rest of Europe. These soldiers were used by Napoleon in wars to conquer other parts of Europe. All seemed to outweigh the advantage of the administrative changes. The problems caused by French rule became greater than the benefits of reforms. So people started opposing Napoleon despite his improvements. Okay, these all are the reasons to hate Napoleon Bonaparte. These are the criticisms of Napoleon Bonaparte rule. What was the reasons why people hate Napoleon Bonaparte rule? These are the main reasons. Which were there? Reasons. Reasons why people started opposing Napoleon. People initially welcomed Napoleon Bonaparte because he removed feudalism and introduced reforms, but later they opposed him for many reasons. First one, the lack of political freedom. Napoleon improved administration, but he did not give real democracy or freedom to people. People realized they were still under foreign control. Second one, heavy taxation. Third one, censorship. Freedom of speech and expression were restricted. Newspaper and ideas were controlled by government. Forced conscription. French domination. Wars and suffering. Okay. So first one is lack of political freedom. That is, democracy was reduced. Democracy was reduced. Political power of people was also reduced. That Napoleon Bonaparte doesn't give real democracy or freedom to people. Second one is heavy taxation. Common people suffered financially. Taxes increased in conquered regions. Third one is censorship. That is freedom of expression or freedom of speech was restricted. That is newspapers, books, and ideas were controlled by the government. That was in forced conscription. What do you mean by conscription? That is forced to join the military. That is called as conscription. So people were forced to join the army without their consent. Without their consent. And French domination. Many people felt Napoleon was trying to dominate Europe. So nationalism grew against French control. And wars and suffering. Continuous wars were there, death, economic problems, and destructions. But the initial enthusiasm turned to hostility as it became clear that the new administrative arrangements did not go in hand with political freedom. That is, people were not giving political freedom, and also increased taxation, censorship, forced conscription into the French armies required to conquer the rest of Europe. All seemed to outweigh the advantages of the administrative changes. So, main points that led to the hate against Napoleon Bonaparte, or that led to hostility, is first one, political power was reduced, or political power of people was reduced, democracy was reduced. Second one, censorship, that is freedom of speech and expression were controlled by the government. Newspapers, books, ideas, etc. were controlled. Third one is compulsory military, that is called forced conscription. Forced conscription. And fourth one, heavy taxation. People have to pay taxes very heavily. And also where there was so many wars and suffering was there, death, destruction, economic problems was there, and these are the main reasons that led to hate Napoleon Bonaparte. And while coming to the main things, or the civil code of 1804 or Napoleonic code 1804, what were the features of this Napoleonic code? Why were the French armies initially welcomed in many European regions? They brought monarchy, they promised liberty and reforms, they reduced trade, they spread feudalism. No, they abolished feudalism, they brought monarchy, they promised liberty and reforms. I think B. Correct. The French armies were initially welcomed because many people believed they would bring liberty, equality, and end of feudalism. What caused the initial enthusiasm for French rule to turn into hostility? Better transport systems, uniform laws, increased taxation and forced conscription, standardized weights and measures. See, people became hostile toward French rule because of increased taxes, forced military service or conscription, censorship, lack of political freedom. What does conscription means? It's the forced recruitment into the army. Which of the following freedoms was restricted under Napoleon's rule? Trade freedom, freedom of expression, freedom to travel, freedom to own property. Freedom of expression, that is censorship. What did businessmen benefit from under Napoleon's reforms? Different currencies in each region, feudal privileges, uniform laws and common currency, more trade barriers. Trade barriers were less, so if businessmen want benefit, they should have uniform laws and common currency. Uniform laws, common national currency, standardized weights and measures. These reforms made trade easier across regions. Which system was abolished by Napoleon in conquered territories? Feudal system. Napoleon abolished the feudal system in many conquered territories and freed peasants from feudal dues and serfdom. These feudal dues are also called as manorial dues. What was one major advantage of standardized weights and measures? Easier trade between regions. Why did many Europeans oppose Napoleon despite his reforms? He promoted democracy everywhere. He reduced taxes completely. He imposed French control and fought continuous war. He removed censorship completely. Removed censorship completely. I think this will be the answer. He imposed French control and fought continuous war. Many Europeans opposed Napoleon Bonaparte because he controlled conquered territories, increased taxes, forced people into army, fought continuous wars across Europe. Okay. Then removed censorship means censorship itself means that it is the controlling of expression of speech and expression. So removing censorship means that they are giving that freedom. Okay. Removed censorship means removed censorship means these restrictions were ended. People get freedom to speak openly, publish newspapers, write books, share opinions, etc. At the time of Napoleon, censorship itself, there is no restrictions on censorship, but censorship was an important feature during the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. He imposed French control and fought continuous wars. Many Europeans opposed. What was the Napoleonic Code mainly known for? Promoting feudal privileges, establishing equality before law. Yes. Supporting serfdom. Yes, that is also correct. Encouraging censorship. It's feudal privileges were abolished. So A is not correct. Establishing equality before law. Equality before law was established. That is correct. Supporting serfdom. Serfdom was peasants were freed from serfdom. And encouraging censorship. No. Censorship. Establishing equality before law. This is mainly known for Napoleonic Code is mainly known for establishing equality before law. That is one of the property of Napoleonic Code itself. You had studied. What were French armies called in the beginning by many Europeans? Harbingers of liberty or bringers of liberty. At first, many Europeans welcomed the French armies as harbingers of liberty, meaning bringers of freedom and reforms. You are answering very well. Which of the following reforms helped create economic unity under Napoleon? Which of the following reforms helped create economic unity under Napoleon? Different local currencies, internal custom duties, common national currency, feudal taxes. Common national currency. Which of the following countries initially welcomed French armies? Poland, Switzerland, and also Brussels, Mainz, Milan, and Warsaw. People in Holland, Netherlands, and Netherlands is also known as Holland, and Switzerland initially welcomed the French armies because they hoped the French would bring liberty and reforms. Okay. So in this chapter, that is the French Revolution and the idea of nation. Today we have learned about two things. First one is Napoleonic Code or Civil Code of 1804. Civil Code of 1804. This is very important, and here also this is also very important, that is why Napoleon Bonaparte was hated by the French people, or why the initial enthusiasm was soon turned to hostility towards French Revolution or towards Napoleon Bonaparte, or criticism to Napoleon Bonaparte. That is mainly seen in this paragraph. First they were liked by the people, but then that turned into hostility. The people were turned against Napoleon Bonaparte. So these two things we have discussed. Now we are moving to the next chapter, that is the making of nationalism in Europe. If you look at the map of mid 18th century Europe, you will find that there were no nation states as we know them today. What we know today as Germany, Italy, and Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons, whose rulers had their autonomous territories. Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies within the territories of which lived diverse people. They did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity or a common culture. Often they even spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. The Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria-Hungary, for example, was a patchwork of many different regions and peoples. It included the Alpine region, the Tyrol, Austria, and Sudetenland, as well as Bohemia, where the aristocracy was predominantly German speaking. It also included the Italian speaking provinces of Lombardy and Venetia. In Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, while the other half spoke a variety of dialects. In Galicia, the aristocracy spoke Polish. Besides these three dominating groups, there also lived within the boundaries of the empire a mass of subject peasant peoples, Bohemians, Slovaks to the north, and Slovenians in Carniola, Croats to the south, and Romans to the east in Transylvania. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity. The only tie binding these diverse groups together was a common allegiance to the emperor. How did nationalism and the idea of the nation state emerge? This passage explains that before nationalism, Europe was divided into many small kingdoms and empires. People did not feel united as one nation. Okay. Before nationalism, Europe was not considered as a nation. Means that people does not feel Europe as a nation. Europe was divided into small kingdoms and empires. If you look at the map of mid 18th century Europe, you will find that there were no nation states as we know them today. Meaning in the mid 1700, modern countries like today did not exist. Europe was not divided into nation states. European countries. Europe is a continent made up of many countries. France, Germany, Italy, United Kingdom, Spain, Russia, Austria, Greece, Poland, Switzerland. These all are European countries. So before 1700, this was, or 17th century, these countries was there, but the countries was not identified as a nation. For example, Germany will be there, but Germany was not given the name Germany, or they were not considered as an independent country. What we know today as Germany, Italy and Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies and cantons. Meaning countries such as Germany, Italy and Switzerland were split into many small political units. Example, kingdoms, duchies and cantons, whose rulers had their autonomous territories. Each small region had its own ruler and independent administration. Autonomous means self-governing. Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies. These regions were ruled by kings or emperors with absolute power. A ruler with complete authority is called as autocratic monarchy. So people have low choices or low political freedom within the territories of which lived diverse peoples. Many different groups of people lived inside these empires. They had different languages, cultures and traditions. They did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity or a common culture. People did not feel united as one nation. There was no common national identity. Often they even spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups, meaning different communities. Spoke different languages, belonged to different ethnic backgrounds. This made unity difficult. Habsburg Empire. The Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria-Hungary, for example, was a patchwork of many different regions and peoples. Meaning, the Habsburg Empire included many different nationalities and regions. Patchwork means a mixture of many different groups. It included the Alpine regions, the Tyrol, Austria and the Sudetenland. Meaning, the empire included mountain regions such as Tyrol, Austria, Sudetenland, as well as Bohemia, where the aristocracy was predominantly German speaking. Meaning, in Bohemia, most nobles spoke German. It also included the Italian speaking provinces of Lombardy and Venetia, meaning some parts of the empire spoke Italian, such as Lombardy and Venetia. In Hungary, Half of the population spoke Magyar while the other half spoke a variety of dialects. Meaning in Hungary, some people spoke Magyar, Hungarian language, others spoke different local languages. In Galicia, the aristocracy spoke Polish. In Galicia, upper class nobles used the Polish language. Besides these three dominating groups, there also lived within the boundaries of the empire. Apart from the main groups, many smaller communities also lived there. A mass of subject peasant peoples, Bohemians and Slovaks to the north, Slovenes in Carniola, Croats to the south, and Romans to the east in Transylvania, meaning many peasant communities lived in different regions, such as Bohemians, Slovaks, Slovenes, Croats, Romans, and Romanians. Each had different identities and languages. And 16. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity, meaning because people were so different, it was hard to create one united nation. The only thing binding these diverse groups together was a common allegiance to the emperor. The meaning common factor was loyalty to the emperor ruling the empire. People were united politically, not culturally. Important terms: nation state, a country where people share common identity and culture. Autocratic monarchy, government where one ruler has complete power. Collective identity, a shared feeling of belonging together. Ethnic group, a group sharing common culture, language, or ancestry. Before nationalism, Europe was divided into many kingdoms and empires containing different linguistic and ethnic groups. People lacked a common national identity, and unity existed mainly through loyalty to emperors and monarchs. So, this is a tough paragraph to study. Uh, Important points to study. Help me to study. Study the above paragraph. Paragraph. Okay. Understand the main idea. The paragraph explains before nationalism, Europe was divided into many small kingdoms and empires. People had different languages and cultures, so there was no national unity. The paragraph explains before nationalism, Europe was divided into small kingdoms and empires. People had different languages and cultures, so there was no natural unity. No national unity. Okay. Break the paragraph into four small parts. Part 1. No nation states in Europe. Remember, Germany, Italy, Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons. The three countries that described in this paragraph are: first one Germany, second one Italy, third one Switzerland. They were divided into different kingdoms, duchies, and cantons. Europe was broken into many small states. Different peoples lived together. In Central and Eastern Europe, different languages, different ethnic groups, and different cultures were there. So people did not feel united. So in the case of Central and Eastern Europe, so mainly Central and Eastern Europe, different languages were there, different cultures were there, and different ethnic groups were there. So people doesn't feel as a united nation or united. Habsburg Empire. The Habsburg Empire was a mixture of many groups, important groups. Austria and Bohemia. They were German speaking. Lombardy and Venetia were Italian speaking. Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, and while the other half spoke dialects, and in Galicia, Polish. No political unity. Because people were so different, unity was difficult. No common national feeling existed. Only one thing united them, that is loyalty to the emperor. The emperor united them, not nationalism. So in this paragraph, we are studying about four steps. First one is understanding the main idea. Understand the main idea. That is, German was not a nation, as it is divided into kingdoms, different duchies, and different cantons. And second, different peoples lived together. Different peoples lived together, having different cultures, different languages, different ethnic groups lived together. And third one is discussing about Habsburg Empire. What is Habsburg Empire? Habsburg Empire contains a mixture of many groups. It includes first one Austria and Bohemia. Austria and Bohemia, the people spoke German. Second one is Lombardy. Lombardy and Venetia. Lombardy and Venetia were Italian speaking. And Hungary, Magyar. In Hungary, there are two languages are set in textbook. Half of the population of Magyar speaks. Half of the population of Hungary spoke Magyar, while half spoke dialects. And fourth one is Galicia. Galicia, they spoke Polish. Okay. So Austria and Bohemia, German. Hungary, half people speak Magyar, and half of the population of Hungary speak dialects. And in Galicia, people spoke Polish. And which countries speak Italian? Lombardy and Venetia. Okay. And no political unity, because people were so different. Unity was difficult. No common national feeling existed. Only one thing united them, that is loyalty to the emperor. The emperor united them, not nationalism. So now just read once again. Now we can read the NCERT textbook once again. What if you look at the map of mid 18th century Europe, you will find that there were no nation state as we know them today. What we know today as Germany, Italy, and Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons whose rulers had their own autonomous territories. Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies within the territories of which lived diverse people. They did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity or a common culture. Often they even spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. The Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria, Hungary, for example, was a patchwork of many different regions and people. It included Alpine regions, the Tyrol, Austria and Sudetenland, as well as Bohemia, where the aristocracy was predominantly German-speaking. It also included the Italian-speaking provinces of Lombardy and Venetia. In Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, while the other half spoke a variety of dialects. In Galicia, the aristocracy spoke Polish. Besides these three dominating groups, there also lived within the boundaries of the empire a mass of subject peasant peoples, Bohemians and Slovaks to the north, Slovenians in Carniola, Croats to the south, Romans to the east in Transylvania. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity. The only tie binding these diverse groups together was a common allegiance to the emperor. Learn important keywords. Nation state, country with a common identity. Autocratic monarchy, ruled by one powerful king. Monarchy, as you all know, that it is the ruling by a powerful king. And autocratic means only one powerful king is there. Autocratic. Collective identity, feeling of belonging together. Ethnic group, group sharing culture or language. Autonomous, self-governing. What is this self-governing means? Autonomous. Having the freedom or power to govern or control oneself is the explanation. If a region or state is autonomous, it can make many of its own decisions, govern itself, and has some independence. In the chapter, Germany and Italy were divided into many kingdoms, duchies, and autonomous territories. Examples for autonomous countries. India is a fully independent country. Inside India, some regions have some autonomous powers like certain tribal councils in northeast India. China has autonomous regions such as Tibet, Xinjiang. These regions can manage some local affairs but are still under China. So autonomous means if a region or state is autonomous, it can make many of its own decisions, govern itself, and has some independence. Only some independence is there. Okay, this is an example. Imagine a school that gives each class freedom to make its own rules. Then each class is somewhat autonomous. Okay, that means autonomous means self-governing or having the power to control one's own affairs. Now it's clear. Now autocratic monarchy. Autocratic. Autocratic, a system of government where one ruler has complete power. The ruler makes decision alone, does not allow much public participation, and often suppresses opposition. An autocratic government, the king, emperor, or dictator controls everything. People have very little freedom. If a king makes laws alone, punishes critics, and does not allow elections, then his rule is called autocratic. Okay. Autocratic opposite is democratic. Autocratic, one ruler has power. In democrat, people elect leaders. Autocrat, less freedom. Democrat, more freedom. Autocrat, no public opinion. Democratic, public participation is allowed. Autocratic means ruled by one person with absolute power and little public freedom. Any countries. Yes, some examples of countries that had or still have autocratic government are North Korea. Or is heavily controlled by one ruling family and the government. Oh. And Saudi Arabia also somewhat is a monarchy where the king has major powers. Okay. Collective identity, feeling of belonging together, ethnic group, group sharing culture or language. Autonomous means self-governing. We have seen the examples of schools with a classroom, and the classroom has the full right to make their laws. That is similar to autonomous. Repeat these 3 times. Europe had no nation states. Different peoples with different languages lived under large empires like the Habsburg Empire. They were united only by loyalty to the emperor. Exam oriented important points. Very important for boards. Why was there no political unity in Europe? Answer. Different languages, different ethnic groups, different cultures, and loyalty only to emperor. Quick MCQs practice. What united the diverse groups in the Habsburg Empire? What united the diverse groups in the Habsburg Empire? Loyalty to the emperor. The diverse groups in Habsburg Empire were united mainly by their loyalty to the emperor, which empire was described as a patchwork of many different regions and peoples. Habsburg Empire. The Habsburg Empire was called a patchwork of many different regions and peoples because it contained many linguistic and ethnic groups. Which language was spoken by half of the population in Hungary? Magyar. And half spoke dialects. In Hungary, nearly half the population spoke Magyar, that is a Hungarian language. Which of the following countries was divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons in the 18th century? Italy, Germany, and Switzerland, all of the above. Now it's the break section.